NTV Television Network presents The Other Day, Current Era, 1985. Translation and voiceover by BMI Russian. Good evening. Welcome to episode 25 of our series The Other Day, 1961 to 1991, Current Era. Events, people, and occurrences that defined a lifestyle. Things that you can't imagine us without, let alone comprehend. Another year, another episode. Today let's discuss 1985. Winter Cherry, the Perestroika begins, Sergei Bubka, the old Arbat, the Star Wars program, the battle against drinking, finding the Titanic, my friend Ivan Lapshin, Kasparov becomes champion, rubber batons in the USSR, the mutilation of Danaë. Commenting we have actress Tatiana Drubich, political expert Sergei Karaganov, author Anatoly Strelyany. I never knew it could be like this. Thank you. In 1985, the world's largest plane goes airborne. The Ruslan An-124, conceived by the Antonov Design Bureau. 230 feet in length and in wingspan. It was capable of carrying 60 Lotus full of passengers and their luggage. For loading and unloading, this super heavyweight would pull its landing gear in and lie on its belly, while opening hatches up front and in the rear. The Ruslan was able to land on dirt runways and even on frozen swamps. Le Bourget airshow spectators were amazed to see an Su-26M airplane and a K-32 helicopter pop out from the Ruslan's gullet. This flying hangar was a sort of huge Russian doll of the Soviet aircraft industry. On March 10, 1985, Konstantin Chernenko passes away. He had been leader of the Soviet Union for only 13 months, which was less than any of his predecessors. A dedicated plenary meeting was held in haste the very next day. There, the youngest member of the Politburo was elected to be General Secretary of the Communist Party Central Committee, who had literally just turned 54 years of age. His name was Mikhail Gorbachev. The mourning period for Chernenko was shorter than that for Brezhnev. Do you have a pass to attend the funeral? I have a season ticket. All of a sudden, that joke became redundant. The very age of the new General Secretary was a sign of upcoming fundamental changes. The rule of the Kremlin elders was over in less than 3 years. The Soviet Union has never been a threat to anyone. However, nobody will ever be successful in imposing their will upon us. Over a month went by before they announced a plenary meeting to take place in April. There, Gorbachev gave a conservative speech, introduced Ligachev, Ryzhkov, and Chebrikov to the Politburo, after which he took a pause until the middle of May. The first ever forbidden pictures hit Soviet theaters, directed by L.M. Klimov and Alexei German. Off-the-shelf films weren't yet a thing, and all newspapers wrote was that this movie took a while to reach the viewers. Klimov's agony was the biggest talking point. This film about the Tsar's favorite Rasputin had been banned for 10 years, as it was deemed aimless. Stab father with a knife? For there to be blood? Lots of it. After all, Pop's nickname is Bloody. That same year, another movie by Klimov was released, apocalyptically titled Come and See. It was awarded the Golden Prize at the Moscow Film Festival. To describe German's picture My Friend Ivan Lapshin, which had been banned for 4 years, they used the term hyperrealism. Lapshin and another of German's films called Trial on the Road, banned for 15 years, seemed like hidden camera footage of real life in the 1930s and 1940s. Soviet cinema tended to be about approximation, but here they changed the game in terms of sound, picture, and style. Horrible. On May 15th, Mikhail Gorbachev makes it to Leningrad. This was his first domestic trip as the national leader. The General Secretary specifically chose the cradle of three revolutions to state that, apparently, we are all in need of some rearrangements. All of us. This trip made Gorbachev into a TV superstar. Vremya showcased all of the General Secretary's Leningrad speeches, with the most spectacular being the one given at Smolny. Gorbachev's explanations were to the effect of, if you need remodeling, find yourself some moonlighters. This was something that all TV viewers were aware of, but it had never been said on air, especially at party meetings, and especially by the General Secretary. After the frail elders, you had this energetic and positive man in his prime, whose gestures and pronunciation had a southern flair to them. I've met with people on the streets, at factories, with scientists. Today I spoke with some college students. Gorbachev was like Chichikov, who everyone found endearing, some because he was an MSU graduate, others because he used to be an assistant combiner, because he was young or because he wasn't too young. Everybody was closely examining the birthmarks on his bald head, but nobody was saying that God marked a loose cannon, all because Gorbachev was especially adored by women. I want to hear you out. Here at the Vostania Square at the corner of Nevsky and Ligovsky prospects is where the Perestroika began. Gorbachev stood before the people. The crowd wasn't specially selected. These were just random people in one of the town's busiest places. Someone was holding a crying child. Gorbachev would repeat the same basic thing multiple times, and so his first meeting with the people would be forgotten. However, one final phrase that was amazingly accurate in terms of reaction would find its way into future populism handbooks. In a country with no representative government, where public politics weren't a thing, and where for 10 years it was unclear whether the national leader was even conscious on any given day, when parting with Gorbachev, the people of the Soviet Union of 1985 wished for him to be closer to the people, to which Gorbachev, who didn't even have room to spread his arms, immediately replied, "Does it get any closer? Please stay closer to the people. Does it get any closer than this?" It wasn't long ago that people thought rubber batons were only used on black folks in the US. But now Soviet militiamen were also patrolling the streets with very similar batons, and in all towns where the situation was complicated. Officially, these were called rubber sticks, PR-73. According to protocol, they weren't allowed to use them against clearly pregnant women, disabled people, or minors, unless they were armed and resisting arrest. Another recommendation was to avoid hitting people on the head or the neck. Rubber batons were mostly used for suppressing mass riots, when the crowd had to be broken up. And for that, they would be called democratizers. May of 1985 marked the beginning of radical rearrangements in government ranks, with elderly ministers and first secretaries of regional committees resigning. There wasn't a single edition of Vremya that didn't feature such a report, though aside from industry workers and the regional population, nobody knew the names of the old retirees or the new appointees. Every time a well-known high-ranking official retired or a new face appeared amidst the Kremlin elites, it was quite the surprise. Unlike Andropov and Chernenko, Gorbachev was in no rush to simultaneously assume the positions of General Secretary and Chairman of the Supreme Soviet Presidium. His nominee for the formal position of Soviet President was Andrei Gromyko, out of gratitude, as was the general understanding, since Gromyko was the one who suggested electing Gorbachev. An even bigger sensation was the choice of successor to Gromyko. Now, instead of Mr. No, who had been the head of Soviet foreign affairs for almost 3 decades, the post of Foreign Affairs Minister was assigned to Georgia's party leader Eduard Shevardnadze, who had barely ever been abroad. 80-year-old Prime Minister Nikolai Tikhonov was replaced by Nikolai Ryzhkov. Central Committee Secretary and former head of Leningrad Party organization Romanov stepped down and was replaced by Zykov, who was also from Leningrad. First Secretary of Moscow's Town Committee Grishin was replaced by Yeltsin, a Central Committee Secretary who had recently been transferred from Sverdlovsk. Romanov and Grishin used to be regarded as contenders for the General Secretary throne. 2 new heads of key Central Committee departments, Yakovlev and Lukyanov, were the final additions to Gorbachev's team of 1985. Central Committee member, Foreign Affairs Minister Raoul Leroy, and other officials. Soviet basketball enters the era of Žalgiris Kaunas. After a 34-year hiatus, this team wins the national championship once again. The former favorite team, CSK, was vanquished in the superfinals. The first game was held in Moscow, with Žalgiris easily winning. When the party came to Kaunas, the army club immediately shot ahead, with the Lithuanians barely being able to close the gap. Only during the last seconds did they score the deciding ball, winning at 77-75. The rivalry between CSK and Žalgiris all of a sudden made basketball much more popular in the USSR. Before that, it was only considered a national sport in Lithuania, but now Sabonis, Kurtinaitis, Javasa and Chomikus were known by the entire country. That time Žalgiris proved to be stronger and faster. For the entire year of 1985, a battle was waged against a misanthropic program designated Star Wars. Reagan had announced that the mutual deterrence strategy was to be replaced by a system of America being absolutely protected from a nuclear strike. A cosmic shield or umbrella was going to be installed over the US, rendering Soviet missiles useless. The program, officially named SDI, or Strategic Defense Initiative, made the old nuclear balance logic obsolete. That's when one country couldn't attack the other without facing the consequences. Soviet strategists were very nervous, with America to be invincible and able to strike without fear of retaliation. As if to escalate the tension, the US released animations depicting swarms of space lasers intercepting Soviet missiles before they can get close. We announced that we had no plans for our own SDI, since we knew how to completely invalidate the United States' efforts. We were allegedly preparing a non-symmetrical response, so America would waste money while we would save it. The Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars concept, the idea to create a missile protection shield above and around the US, which would prevent ballistic missiles from making it to their territory, it was all a myth. That gave birth to a bunch of other myths. Ultimately, these myths wore off on mass consciousness, which made them partially true. President Reagan wasn't a particularly bright and educated fellow, though he did have a great feeling for what America needed. And America needed to restore its sense of invulnerability. And on top of that, Americans were already captivated by Star Wars, the ones that gained popularity after George Lucas's films. So in the Soviet Union, there were quite a few different reactions to the idea. Some people in leadership ranks were eager to take counteraction in hope of milking the government for funding, for large sums of money. Some were simply scared, fully aware that the myth was backed by the United States' actual technological and economic superiority. Finally, there was a third group of realists, for whom SDI was yet another reason for political de-escalation and disarmament. After all, the arms race was consuming anywhere from a quarter to a third of the country's GDP. We were essentially waging a full-on war. Thanks to hundreds of space-based platforms, using orbital battle stations with anti-missile capabilities, they intend to destroy the greater portion of ballistic missiles right after launch. In 1985, an international youth and student festival is held in Moscow. It was not able to live up to the first such 1957 meet in Moscow, or the 1980 Olympics. On behalf of the people of our country, I would like to welcome you in the capital city of the United Soviet Socialist Republics, in Moscow. Once again, suspicious people were purged from the streets of Moscow, and you couldn't get in other than for a business trip or unless you had local registration. Militia was on high alert, though this time there was no mass influx of produce. Also lacking was the enthusiasm people once had for children of other nations. The mass parades at stadiums were poorly copied from the Olympics, and the country's youth movement was monopolized by the Komsomol, so activities at events were strictly regulated. To commemorate the festival week, they made a huge amount of raincoat fabric uniform jackets with color inserts, which weren't bad by Soviet standards. In late summer and early fall, a spy scandal occurred between the USSR and the UK. While the Youth and Student Festival was taking place, the British were able to secretly evacuate Oleg Gordievsky, the KGB's double-crossing London resident. Among other things, he exposed Soviet agents operating in the UK to his new masters. The British trustingly offered not to deport our spies in exchange for letting Gordievsky's family flee to the West. However, the offer was declined by the Soviet side. The British government then proceeded to deport 25 employees at London-based Soviet agencies. This included the Air Force and naval attachés, journalists, and a few diplomats who had nothing to do with intelligence. The Soviet Union announced that it would be deporting an equal number of English representatives who were involved in activities incompatible with their official status. Naturally, not all of these 25 people were spies. The British then expelled another 6 of ours. We returned the favor. The situation began to unfold in a strange direction, with both sides realizing that there would soon be nobody to deport, and so they quickly made amends. On July 13, 1985, at 6:14 p.m., for the first time ever, a man jumped higher than the 6-meter mark. At a competition in Paris, it took 3 attempts for 21-year-old Sergei Bubka from Donetsk to set his 5th world record. The next day, the 14th of July, was a national holiday in France, and the newspaper headline on page 1 read, "6 meters, Bubka seizes the Bastille." Bubka became world champion even earlier, in '83, and throughout 1984 he topped the world record by a total of 4.3 inches. The pole-jumping Superman Bubka was the first person in the sport to become a worldwide superstar. The years of stagnation proved to be the most party-filled, with alcohol consumption in the USSR continuously increasing, right until it broke all sorts of world and historic records in 1984. The average annual per capita consumption rate was 2.8 gallons of pure alcohol, in spirit equivalent. One after another, state and party decrees were issued on, quote-unquote, overcoming drinking and alcoholism. The fines for being out in public while intoxicated were dramatically increased. Drinking at work, which was pretty common, was declared the most heinous industry crime, leading to layoffs no questions asked. You could no longer buy alcohol on trains, airplanes, at cafeterias, or in hotels. Truly aggressive healthy lifestyle propaganda was the work of an all-union society of struggle for sobriety, which was joined by 3 million people. Wine was equated to lack of culture, and the public produced a magazine called Sobriety and Culture. Komsomols promoted non-alcoholic weddings, though oftentimes there would be samovars with vodka and teapots with cognac. In the beginning, the anti-alcohol campaign gave many quite a scare, with rumors that this was a program aimed at complete eradication. Allegedly, production of alcohol was meant to cease entirely by 1987, which was the year of the 70th anniversary of the October Revolution. It was thought that Gorbachev would carry Andropov's legacy, with his young age meaning that he'd definitely set everything straight. By the end of 1985, alcohol consumption in the USSR dropped by a quarter, but soon the fear faded away. And that was the only footing that this final totalitarian experiment even had. For his battle against the sauce, Gorbachev would be named the Mineral Secretary and Lemonade Joe. Upon seeing the adorable Raisa on TV, people would say, "It's a good thing that Gorbachev is only sober and not impotent." Alcohol would only go on sale at 2 p.m., at dedicated departments and in specific places. For example, out of the 1,500 liquor stores in Moscow, 1,000 were shut down. People all over the country stood in massive lines. On a holiday's eve, they'd even fight, sometimes literally to the death. Workmen no longer accepted money as payment for services, as it was hard to exchange for goods, so they'd take bottles. Vodka prices were increased twofold, though the lines didn't get any shorter. More people got into making moonshine, but even the cheap cellulose moonshine was nothing compared to mass consumption of rubbing alcohol and window cleaner. By the 1980s, alcohol abuse had gotten so bad that people were scared and waiting for a savior to arrive. Somebody who'd tear nostrils apart and brand people with a hot iron for drinking. There was lust for not just cruelty, but good old Russian cruelty, as in meaningless and widespread. The first person to see that demand was Andropov, but he was promptly summoned by God. Meanwhile, the measures taken by Gorbachev and Ligachev at first appeared to be exactly what the doctor ordered. The cruelty was as pointless as it needed to be, with nothing held back. There was this dignified factory director who took a shot of vodka with his closest colleagues to celebrate his 50th birthday. And after that, he was forced to retire, he was expelled from the party, and then he had a heart attack. They called him a national treasure, yet they drove him into the grave. They also had zero mercy for vineyards. They ignored that the national budget had a hole in it. They removed scenes with toasts from old movies and even operas. But the only thing that didn't work was the second component. They weren't able to reproduce the cruelty on a universal scale. And that is not how you do things in Russia. You can't be merciless in one corner and relaxed and complacent in the other. You can't destroy a man for having a shot of vodka and then tolerate jokes about it. On June 15, 1985, one of Rembrandt's most famous paintings was vandalized in the Hermitage in Leningrad. Someone mutilated the Danaë. A man who up until then went unnoticed slashed the painting twice and had enough time to splash sulfuric acid onto it 3 times. The perpetrator was a Lithuanian man named Bronius Maigas, who only made it to the 4th grade and who at the time was jobless and homeless. He claimed that his actions were a protest against the existing order, with him doing what he did on the day when the Soviet army entered Lithuania in 1940. The court would later declare Maigas a schizophrenic. Rembrandt's painting was boiling because of the acid, so it had to be watered. A good quarter of the picture was lost, and it would take 12 years to restore it. 1985 marked 30 years since signing the Warsaw Pact and founding the Socialist Military Bloc. Leaders of member states arranged a meeting in Warsaw in order to prolong the pact for another 20 years, with possible subsequent automatic renewal for another 10. This meant that the Warsaw Pact was projected into the future right until the year 2015. The possibility was considered for simultaneously disbanding both the Warsaw Pact and NATO. Soviet troops were stationed in all satellite countries, except for our most reliable ally Bulgaria, that was fearlessly bordering with 2 members of NATO, Greece and Turkey. Romania, being the most finicky, also took up that privilege. At the signing in Warsaw, Romanian President Ceausescu was typically being stubborn, forcing Gorbachev to pressure him. At the reception after the signing, Polish Prime Minister Jaruzelski, the only national leader present with a military background, claimed that renewing the Warsaw Pact was forced, by aggressive Western parties naturally. That same day, residents of Warsaw saw their guests off. Congratulations with an important event that took place yesterday on the territory of Warsaw. Winter Cherry hits theaters, the film of the decade about an unfortunate love story, with some elements of real life, but mostly true to cinema. A gorgeous yet lonely woman in love not with a rich, but a poor man who was also married. That's it, go. She was played by Yelena Safonova, beautiful, enigmatic, and confident. He was played by Vitaly Salamin, cute, timid, and most importantly, a family man. They were made for each other, though fate was not on their side. We should get married. Don't we have an agreement? But why? Why? Straight from a Soviet dream appears a guy working for an international firm who takes her away on a white Mercedes. Then a daring pass by Alada, and she goes back. Viewers called her foolish, but believed what they saw and demanded a sequel. Winter Cherry continued in the form of a TV series directed by Igor Maslennikov. Today, the last fruit fly perished. The country's new leadership adopted a new primary economic doctrine: accelerated scientific and technological progress, or simply uskorenia. Gorbachev admitted there being certain difficulties in economic growth. He spoke of uskorenia as an intensification tool. When giving the program speech, Gorbachev poses the question: the technological renovation of the national economy will demand investing huge sums of money. Where do we find it? He immediately follows up with, the measures planned for accelerating scientific and technological progress need to pay for themselves. What's this? You can see its packaging. No, but what is it? Oh, these are jumpers. In the fall of 1985, Garry Kasparov finally gets what he deserves. After FIDE President Campomanes stopped the previous marathon match, a new one kicked off, where Kasparov defeated Karpov, becoming the 13th world chess champion. It was an intense battle of wills, with the chess crown being up in the air right until the final game. Karpov needed to win, while for Kasparov, simply not losing was enough. Ultimately, he even won, becoming the youngest ever world champion at 22 years of age. This marked the start of the Kasparov era in the world of chess. The new General Secretary makes his debut in the West. In October, Gorbachev first meets with Mitterrand in Paris, then with Reagan in Geneva. His visit to France was preceded by Soviet papers publishing an unprecedentedly candid TV interview for Channel TF1. For the first time, the national leader speaks about Soviet dissidents, responding to questions about Sharansky like it's nobody's business. Prior to the Soviet-US summit, the USSR declares a one-sided refusal to conduct nuclear weapons testing. France was regarded as the most convenient partner in the West for the USSR. Gorbachev was eager to display a long-standing sense of friendship, quote-unquote. France's president was the first to hear about a new mindset in foreign relations. But Gorbachev's enthusiasm was met with Mitterrand's disregard. Negotiations lacked virtually any kind of substance and didn't really go anywhere. Gorbachev met with Reagan in Geneva in private, then with their delegations present, and then another time in private. Feeling that they have the upper hand, the Americans weren't willing to concede on a single issue. The sides were barely even able to negotiate a joint statement. At the press conference, Gorbachev complained that America came unprepared to make important decisions. He threatened that a response to the SDI was imminent. Gorbachev and Reagan finally meeting in person was regarded as the main achievement of that conference. After Geneva, those who actively used Russian political lingo added the word summit to their vernacular. However, the leaders of two superpowers agreed on the need for more active dialogue. After 2 years in the making, in 1985, the first and for a long time only pedestrian street was opened in Moscow, the Old Arbat. The concept of the project consisted of 3 ideas: making the street fit for promenades, recreation and commerce, restoring historic locations, and creating a Pushkin reserve. There was unprecedented freedom in a street that you could freely walk and cross. Any trend that was permitted or semi-permitted first appeared in this place. You had breakdancing, street musicians, actors, artists and photographers, peddlers, amateur speakers. Pushkin's apartment on the Arbat, a former communal apartment turned museum, was the city's attempt to make up for demolishing the house where Pushkin was born.
Arbat was made to sort of showcase the Perestroika. They made it a pedestrian street, reminiscent of the major European cities. It was a sort of mock-up, a prop. People sold Russian dolls, amber, Komsomol and Pioneer insignias, military uniforms. Those who knew and loved the old Arbat, they would never accept what had been done to it. I mean, its new form. As for newbies, out-of-towners, why not?
Long before the renovations, the Arbat was an excavated mess that you couldn't drive through. They were routing hardware to the new General Staff building at the Arbat Square. And so they made it a pedestrian street, in order to safeguard its strategic content from exterior disturbances. In the end, the only thing they did properly was the causeway. Brightly colored buildings remained dilapidated within, living here was pretty unbearable, and in terms of commerce, the new Arbat was a much better option. The round street lamps placed in 2 rows didn't fit in with the overall style of olden Moscow, and so Bulat Akujava, who made Arbat the number 3 street glorified in song after Piterskaya and Tverskaya Yemskaya, allegedly roasted it by saying, "Arbat's lights are on but nobody's home." By 1985, people had written dozens of books and shot 4 films about the Titanic's demise. Some had long wanted to find the ship, even working on ways of bringing it to the surface. On September 1st, 1985, a joint French-US oceanographic expedition first discovers the sunken ship's boiler, and then the rest of the Titanic. The valuables stowed away on the Titanic, including jewelry belonging to the wealthy passengers, were worth about $300 million in mid-1980s money. The first successful expedition that studied the sea with a deep-water video camera brought back no souvenirs, only 12,000 color photos. But the following year, the leader of an American research group descended to the Titanic in a submersible and left a commemorative plaque in memory of those who perished on April 14, 1912. Then, in 1987, they were able to bring over 1,000 items back to the surface. Back then, the entire world was discussing 2 issues associated with finding the Titanic. First, who owns what's inside? And second, is extracting stuff from the Titanic akin to grave robbery? Humankind's better half is obsessed with aerobics, gymnastics under a disco rhythm. The success of the American drama film Heavenly Bodies makes this new type of exercise even more popular, and the star of the movie Jane Fonda, the latter's symbol around the world.
Hello. There's some light rhythmic music playing in the background. You're in a good mood? Feeling the energy surging through you? Get ready.
Bending, squatting, steps, jumps, swings, all at a rhythm of 120 beats per minute. This makes for a good workout of the heart, joints, and muscles. And unlike jogging, aerobics weren't a boring thing to do. People would wear tights for gymnastics, check slippers, leg warmers, and brightly colored headbands.
Up and turn and right and left. Up and turn and left and right.
Melodia released a record with a set of exercises accompanied by music. It was thought to be the best 8th of March gift possible. Central Television aired aerobics lessons 3 times a week. And women loved these workouts. But the Puritans among the men demanded they pull these shows off the air, them being obscene. Indeed, flexible women performing in tights was something that the compulsory army servicemen really enjoyed watching.
Where's your enthusiasm? Be light and cheerful.
And that was 1984 in our show The Other Day, 1961 to 1991, current era. Events, people, and occurrences that defined a lifestyle. Next time, we'll cover 1986, Olof Palme's murder, the contest in Yermala, the Moskvich 2141, the Challenger crash, the 5th Congress of Cinematographers, Chernobyl, Corrado Catani, academic scholar Likachov, individual apartments by the year 2000, Admiral Nakhimov, Brighton Beach, Halley's Comet. See you for a new episode and a new year. Farewell.